Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Really quick, I do, before we get to the other games, I do want to talk about this game strictly from the Gonzaga perspective now. If you remember when Coach K lost in the NCAA tournament last year in North Carolina, I did a big segment on who will be the new face of college basketball when Coach K is gone. And I said, I think there's only two people, because there's only two people and two programs that I believe elicit emotion in everyone. One is obviously John Calipari at Kentucky, and two is Mark Few and Gonzaga. Every time they win, they have their supporters that are like, see, look how good they are. And every time they lose in the tournament, it's, oh my God, they were overrated. They're the worst thing ever. And so I do want to talk about Gonzaga, because I do think every single time they lose in the tournament, it is always a story. But what I would also say is this is maybe their most interesting loss in the tournament for one simple reason, which I'll get into in a minute. Before I do, let me say this. If you think that Gonzaga somehow choked on Saturday, if you think that this is somehow an indictment on Mark Few or Gonzaga, I'm just going to say it. You're a freaking idiot. Watch that game. The way UConn played in the second half, I don't think any team in college basketball would beat them. And as a matter of fact, to take it a step further, I actually was more impressed with Mark Few and Gonzaga this year than I have been in a long time. Because if you look at this Gonzaga roster right now, Drew Timme is a historically great college basketball player, but he is not an NBA player. And I would argue outside of Julian Strawther, the kid who was really good, hit the game-winning shot against UCLA, I would argue that this team, I don't know if it has an NBA player on the roster outside of Julian Strawther. And so I bring it up because for Mark Few to get this team to 30-6, I believe was their final score. They had a win over Michigan State in the out of conference. They had a win over Xavier in the out of conference. They beat Kentucky. They beat St. Mary's a few times. They beat UCLA in the Sweet 16. They beat TCU in the round of 32. I actually thought this was one of Mark Few's better coaching jobs, because I think this is probably his least talented roster in about 5-6 years. I mean, you go back to 2019, they were a number one seed. So it wasn't 2019. Maybe it was 2018. I don't know. But it's been a while since he has had a roster this as untalented, I would argue, as this year. Again, I believe they only have one NBA player on this roster. I do think, though, so one, don't blame Mark Few. This was a bad matchup on paper. Everybody liked UConn, and it proved to be that way. And again, if Drew Timme doesn't get in foul trouble, maybe it's at least respectable, if not a 28-point win. At the same time, though, I do think there are two very interesting questions about the future of Gonzaga now that their season's over. One is the future of Drew Timme. Now, Drew Timme, for people who do not know, he is a fourth-year senior right now. Freshman year was that 2020 COVID year. Sophomore year, they make the championship game, lose to Baylor. Last year, they lose to Arkansas in the Sweet 16. This year, they lose to UConn in the Elite Eight. And so it's interesting because Drew Timme has said very publicly, this is the last dance. This is his last go-around at Gonzaga. I do think he's going to have an interesting decision to make over these next couple months, because the bottom line is that Drew Timme, like everybody who played during the 2021 season, remember, he's got an extra year of eligibility because of COVID. He can come back next year if he wants to. And I bring it up because he has said publicly, this is the last dance. I'm not coming back. I appreciate my time at Gonzaga, but it's time for me to do something else. But I will be curious, because Drew Timme is really one of those faces of NIL, a guy that has taken it. He's really what NIL is supposed to be about. Him, CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, guys that have produced earning money because of their name, image, likeness, and what they have done on the court or on the field. So it's going to be interesting because he says he's not coming back, but he has another year. And it's pretty understood at this point that he's probably making more playing college basketball than he would as a pro. Some of those endorsement deals, they probably won't be there if you're playing in the G League. Some of those endorsement deals, they probably won't be there if you're playing overseas. But if you're playing 30 times a year on national TV at Gonzaga, standalone games on ESPN every Thursday night, it's a little bit of a different deal. So one, I'm curious what Drew Timme does. But two, I also think Drew Timme has a tough decision to make, because what team exactly is he coming back to? And this is where I think the very interesting conversation about Gonzaga begins, because I do think there is a conversation to be had. And I think deep down Gonzaga fans know it, but they don't want to admit it. There is a fair conversation to be had of, has our best window to win a title passed us by? And I know what everyone will say, oh, they've made 8 straight Sweet 16s. They're going to keep rolling, whatever. Well, here's the bottom line. Look at this roster next year without Drew Timme, without Julian Strawther, who will probably go pro, and without Rasir Bolton, who, of course, was their Rasir Bolton was this season. He was one of their best players, but he is officially out of eligibility as a fifth-year college player. He averaged 10 points, 39% three-point shooting. He didn't have a great NCAA tournament, but he was a really good player. You take off Drew Timme, you take off Rasir Bolton, you take off Julian Strawther. That's a lot of talent. And unlike in years past, it doesn't appear as though there is that next wave of guys that's ready to step up. And so it's interesting because when Arizona lost a few weeks ago, we talked about from the Arizona perspective, okay, Tommy Lloyd, this is now your program. All Sean Miller's guys are basically gone, especially now that Kirk Kriisa is in the portal. Time for you to show us what you can do. But at the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, I would argue that the Tommy Lloyd influence at Gonzaga at this point is gone as well. And what do I mean by that? How did Tommy Lloyd get the Arizona job? Well, it was because he was the guru international recruiter. And it felt like every year, Gonzaga always had that 1 to 2 guys, the international guys. There was always one that was like a star, and then there was always like one on the way up. Rui Hachimura from Japan. My boy, Joel Ayayi from France. Domantas Sabonis, obviously Arvydas Sabonis' son. Now he's an NBA All-Star. You go on and on down the list. There was always that next wave of guys. Well, look at Gonzaga's roster this year. They don't have a single international player on it. Now, they are bringing in a player from Australia in the next recruiting class. But right now, Gonzaga to me is at an interesting inflection point, because they were one of the few programs that was kind of immune. They weren't really the one and done school. They weren't really this. They weren't really that. They were their own thing. They had a big international, situation. They were able to redshirt guys. Guys stayed in the program. I remember saying 2-3 years ago, they were one of the few programs guys would stay a year longer to make sure they were ready for the NBA. Rui Hachimura, Corey Kispert. There was a lot of guys that could have left a year earlier, decide to come back. Well, now, if Drew Timme leaves and Julian Strawther goes pro, who's that next wave of guys? Now, they're just another program with a bunch of one-and-dones or a bunch of more likely transfers. And I think that they're in an interesting inflection point, because you go back the last couple of years. Listen, 2019, they were a number 1 seed. They were good enough to win the national championship that year. They lost to Texas Tech in the Elite Eight. 2020, they were playing as well as anyone when the season was shut down. 2021, the number 1 overall seed, the year they lose to Baylor in the title game. 2022, with Chet Holmgren and Drew Timme, they were the number 1 overall seed as well. And then this past season, obviously a 3 seed going to the Elite Eight. Not saying it's over for Gonzaga. Not saying it's over for Mark Few. I respect what he's built. But I also do think there is a fair question to be asked of, has their best window passed them by? And what is the future of this program? I'll tell you right now, I'm already starting to put together next year's top 25, preseason, way too early top 25. I don't know if based on what they have coming back, that's an NCAA, a top 25 team. Now, NCAA tournament's a different deal. They're still in the WCC as of right now, this second, as they flirt with the Big 12. But is this a program that's going to keep playing at this level with the changes in college hoops and the changes in that program? I don't know. It is worth noting, and it is worth keeping an eye on.